the topic of this afternoon discussion is observing Israel as a high-tech nation and what can we learn from it. But I decided to take the first portion and describe more the context that we are in, which is not specific to Israel, namely it's relevant very well also to Turkey or to any other nation, namely the era that we are in. We are in the era of technology and innovation in fast forward, let's say, okay? And it has some implications. So let's look at that and how this impacts our lives and also the commercial and business aspects. So actually, us older people, okay, we may remember about 40 years ago there was this movie, The Magnificent Man with the Flying Machines. I don't know how many of you know it, because it talks about the beginning of the 20th century when there were the first airplanes, you know, when there was a competition of flights from the UK to France. I don't remember from which city to which city or whatever, and it was, and so on, very, very interesting and so on. Because at the time, you know, there were no commercial flights. There wasn't something like that. It was the beginning of that era. Because the reason is that I think today we have in a similar situation with smart machines. Namely, it's the beginning of an era. I mean, it seems to us like a lot of things are already developed and so on, but I think the sky's the limit on the innovations that are still ahead of us. Also, I refer you to a book that I read like a year ago by Walter Isaacson. I don't know if you know him. He wrote the book on Steve Jobs. He got the book on Einstein, the book on Benjamin Franklin. He's an excellent writer. And he wrote this book on the innovators, which actually describes the past 60, 70 years. I mean, it starts with Ada, the daughter of, what's his name, the poet Byron, okay? And so Lord Byron, and with Babbage and so on and so forth, but it goes all the way to the innovators. Very, very interesting book. I refer you to find it and read it. Okay, but let me see a show of hands. Who here in the room does not have or does not use a smartphone? Not surprising. I mean, actually, I ask this question you know, several times a month. I always get the same answer. Nobody raises their hand. Now, who had a smartphone or used a smartphone 12 years ago? Also not surprising. The very simple reason. The first smartphone, iPhone 1, was invented or was introduced, sorry, in July 2007, which is less than 12 years ago. So at the time, it was a new thing. Today, I mean, my wife lost her smartphone about 2 years ago. For 3 days, she was like, I mean, like she lost her legs, her hands, maybe her head. I mean, all her life was in that smartphone, all the pictures of the grandchildren, all the contact, everything, okay? So just imagine your life without it, okay? It's almost unimaginable, and it's something that didn't exist 12 years ago, okay? So probably somewhere, somebody is inventing today something that 12 years from now we're not going to be able to live without it, and we don't know even what it is. Okay, it means there is a very, very fast change of our environment. This is, I took it, I don't remember from where, okay? It shows all these applications that we're using didn't exist 18 years ago. Okay, and I mean, this is what, at least I'm using many of those regularly, every few minutes, you know, and they didn't exist. So it's a new world that we are in, and it builds its own dynamics, you know, like communities and so on and so forth. You know, you have your WhatsApp groups, and you have your Facebook friends, and you have this and you have that, interest groups. All those things didn't exist. Okay, who knows what an exponential function is? Exponential function. Many of you use. Still, I would like to refer you. This is a story that actually my father told me when I was 10 years old, something like that. He told it about a Chinese emperor, but the same thing is also true. I found it in the internet about an Indian emperor, but the same thing. He was so impressed with this wise person that invented chess that he told me, you know, whatever you want, I'm going to give you. What do you want? And he said, I'm a modest person. You see this chessboard game board, okay? Put 1 grain of, if it's Chinese, it's rice. If it's India, it's going to be wheat. 1 grain in the first cubicle, 2 on the second, 4 on the third, and so on, and fill it. So he said, well, great. He called his treasurer and told him, go calculate, you know, how much rice I need to give him or how much wheat I need to give him. You do the calculation, you know. He came back and he said, you know, if you cover the whole land of India with 1 meter of wheat, this is roughly what he needs to get. My point is, it's a function that you don't feel it so much when you're in it, but if you blow up a little and look, it grows what we call exponentially. It goes very, very fast because you double every so often. If it is every, you know, cubic of the board, or if it is every year, or if it is everything something else. Now, why do I mention it? Because there are 2 phenomena that we are lucky because they complement each other that are exponential. One of them is what we call Moore's law. I don't know, how many of you heard of Moore's law? Okay, many of you did. Oh, good. In most cases, people never heard of it, okay? So Gordon Moore, I was lucky. I was at Intel many years, and I used to work with Gordon. He's a very, very impressive person, very, very smart and very quiet. Anyhow, in 1965, he coined this law, which is not a law of nature. It's more of a behavioral law that said that every 2 years, the number of transistors on the chip is going to double. Okay, that's the law. And actually, 10 years later, in 1975, roughly, he came back and he revisited it and he said, no, it's not going to take 2 years, it's going to take only 1.5 years for the number of transistors on the chip to double. And ever since, this was like the drum that the whole industry was marching against, because everybody knew that this is going to happen. So if you are not following this law, you're going to be behind on your race. So Intel knew that IBM and that TSMC and that whoever, AMD, are going to be that and so on. So everybody knew the others are going to be. So you make all your efforts to keep up with this marching drum. In reality, by the way, what happened is because the overhead of every generation is so big, it was actually every 3 years, it's going to be 4 times. 4x in every 3 years, not 1.5 year, 2. It's going to be generation, it's going to jump every 4 years, and that happened. I just went back some time ago, and I ran to the calculation in 2015, and what I saw is the following. I remember 1970. I joined Intel in 1974, but I knew what happened 3 or 4 years earlier, okay? The first big commercial product of Intel was the 1K DRAM, the 1103, okay? So a 1,000 bits DRAM basically says 1,000 transistors, right? I mean, a DRAM is 1 transistor per bit, okay? So it was like 10 to the third devices. Now you can buy a flash memory or a disk on key or whatever of roughly 256 gigabytes, okay, which is roughly 10 to the 12 devices. If you divide the two, you are a scientific audience, so you know how to divide these two numbers, right? You get 10 to the 9th. And you know that 10 to the third 1,000 is roughly 2 to the 10th, right? 1,024. So basically, 10 to the 9th means 2 to the 30th. 2 to the 30th in 45 years is exactly 2x every 1.5 years. So up until 2015, roughly, Moore's law was on the mark, on the curve. Okay, so there's a lot of discussion how long it's going to continue. My good friend Muli Eden asked Gordon, and he said, no exponential function can live forever. It's going to, sometime it's going to still. But for the past 45 years, we have enjoyed, as humanity, the fact that basically the result of that is, just think about 10 to the 9th. What is the implication? It means that today hardware costs nothing, basically. You can have a computer actually in every appliance and in every, children game, or, in a car. You have today something like 200, 300 microprocessors, or actually computers and so on. Or all the memory, huge, all those server farms, everything is possible because the hardware is so cheap, okay? Now, why is that important? Because on the other hand, I read it in more than one place, the number of bits, or the number of, the amount of information created in year 2017, okay, was more than the number of, the amount of data created since the dawn of humanity until 2017. Okay, now most of that information is garbage, all those pictures that you all take, and all those videos, and all those, or all those, dumb WhatsApps and messages and so on. It doesn't matter. There are still bits that are created, that are processed, that are communicated, that are stored, As far as the infrastructure of computing and networking, the system needs to cope with this huge amount of data. And it seems like in 2018, the amount of data is going to be same, more than all the information created until 2018, including 2017, which means this is an exponential function. It doubles every year. Okay, I mean, again, at a certain point in time, it may reach a point where you can't grow anymore. It's like I don't know how the traffic is in Turkey. In Israel, okay, we are in a very, very deep shit because the number of cars that are bought every year is so large that the infrastructure of roads cannot keep up with it. So every few months, the rush hour is longer hours, and the amount of time you spend on the road is bigger and bigger. Okay, because at a certain point in time, it's going to be such that there's no point in leaving home because you're not going to get to work or to wherever it is because everything is going to be clogged. The solution to that, in our case, should be more public transportation, shifted hours. I mean, there are ways to do it better, or to put a ban on buying cars, whatever it is. But I mean, I'll give you the equivalent of what happens with the traffic of bits on the networks. Also, I mean, at this point in time, so Google and Amazon and the others put more server farms and put more clouds and put more things so to cope with the growing amount of garbage data. But at a certain point in time, that may also get into some kind of a place where you can't grow anymore, and then there's going to be either costs are going to go up, or they're going to make some other ways to subside the demand. But the message I'm giving here is basically, in both those cases, is we have a world around us that is changing very, very fast, not like it used to be 20 years ago or whatever. And I mean, there are other, today you can fit the whole Britannica encyclopedia or whatever it is on one disk on key, okay? I mean, it's mind-blowing in my mind, okay? Or the amount of compute power on your smartphone, okay, is more than was the whole humanity compute power 50 years ago. When they sent, the mission to the moon, okay, the whole compute power of NASA and so on was a fraction of what you have today in your pocket. It's mind-blowing. And here comes a message which is more to the national, and by that I'm going to finish with my background. And this is the treadmill analogy. I'm going to the gym every morning, okay, and you know what a treadmill is? Okay, I'm practicing on the treadmill. Now, what is a treadmill? You run very, very fast to stay in one place. The minute you stop running, you're getting pushed back. Have that analogy in your mind because it is relevant for us as persons, for companies, for universities, and for countries. Okay, the world is running very fast, like the treadmill is under us. And if you need to keep running in order to keep up with the rest of the front of technology and so on. If you stopped, you get pushed behind and you have a problem. Okay? Actually, there are countries that already, I think, are so far behind that I don't see how they're going to be able to bridge that gap. Okay, and it's going on. So the message here is to every person, to every company, to every university, and to every country, is to invest in, keeping up with this race in order to keep relevant. Okay, because I just give another example. I was in a conference some while ago about Industry 4.0. I don't know if you know much about it, but basically it is about introducing new technologies into classical industry and so on. So the message that I got from it that was very striking was, you must, as a manufacturer, put this into your systems, because otherwise just think about competing with a carriage and a horse with cars. There's no way you're going to win, because it's a different generation of, of technology or of solutions. So you'd better, keep updating yourself so that you're relevant and that you are competitive. So that's the context. I'm saying that because when we talk about the state of Israel and so on, it's important to remember that we are in a fast-changing environment. Okay, namely, maybe 50 years ago, everything we talk about would not have been relevant because it was a more, I wouldn't say stagnant, but pretty static environment. Okay, just example, and I took that from, I don't remember from where, from Glenn Perkins. It was just, I took it about a year ago or whatever, and it shows the pace, how long it's going to take in years for a new technology to get accepted. So if you go back to the telephone, okay, or to the radio, we're talking about 30-something years until the measure was a quarter of the population of America uses this new invention. Okay, so it started with 50 years, then 30 years, and so on. And today in social media, it was 5 years. I think if they put it as a smartphone, it would be even less than 5 years. Okay, so it is shortening. The time to adopt a new technology or a new capability is shortening all the time. I'm going to skip that. These are very important things, or very interesting things, but we don't have the time for them, so I'm going to skip them. This is all okay. Some other time. Now let's go to our topic. Until now it was like context or introduction. Okay, so has anybody read the book Startup Nation? Okay, this is a book. It is available. I don't think it's available in Turkish, but it's available in English, definitely. It came out in 2009 and was a bestseller. It was on the bestseller list of New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and so on back in 2010. And it basically describes what I'm talking about. I have some reservations about some of their examples, but basically it gives the same story. I do one exception to that. I don't call it Startup Nation, I call it High Tech Nation. And then I'll explain further down why I do that. But let's start with the bottom line. If you go back 20 years ago, 2000, roughly year 2000, whatever it is, okay, our GDP per person per year, which I heard in Turkey it's 10K, was roughly $15,000 to $17,000. And it was like that for decades, I don't know, for 10, 20 years and so on. It was almost perceived that there is a glass ceiling somewhere around $20,000 per person per year that we're never going to cross. That's life, c'est la vie. We are a developing country, and that's it. Okay, when I looked at it last year, it was over 40,000. Okay, which means it's more than doubled in less than 20 years. Actually, it tripled because also the population grew. So if you take all the numbers, and so the GDP of the country or of the economy tripled in less than 20 years. And when you ask yourself, how come, what happened? The only answer is the high-tech industry. Today, the high-tech industry is well over half of the output of the country, of the export of the country, of any measure you take. And basically, we call it's the locomotive that is pulling the national train. Now, this has tremendous impact on every person in the country, because if you have more money, you can do more things. Just look about taxes or look at the budget of the government. You know, if they have more money, then you have more hospitals, you have more schools, you can have more welfare, everything, okay? And whichever way you look at it, it is, I mean, people who visited Israel 20 years ago and come today, they don't recognize the country. You know, the infrastructure, all the roads, all the bridges, all the new neighborhoods, everything, it fueling the whole economy. And today we're perceived as one of the OECD, let's say, top 30 countries, and we are not a developing country anymore, we are a developed country. Actually, I saw somewhere, where was it? In Ernst & Young or somewhere, these graphs. This shows Israel is the blue below versus the UK, Germany, and France. And you saw that if you look back 15 years ago, you know, in 2002, you see we were very far below. Today we are in the middle of that pack. As far, again, we're talking about GDP, okay? If you compare us with Greece, Spain, or Italy, okay, then we used to be roughly there, and today we are high above these countries. Okay, so namely, it's a phenomenon, it's something that needs explanation. Okay, and this is what I'm going to try and give you at least a perspective of how come, how did it happen? Okay, but when you look at it, it's not just numbers, it's not just dollars. There are other measures. Okay, like I've seen before the numbers of UNAM or Bilkent about research papers. Okay, so Israel is #1 in the world on research papers in either top-notch journals or conferences, okay, per capita, not absolute numbers. But we are, you remember, we are a country of 8 million people. I think Turkey is 80 million, give or take. So it's 80, right. So you are roughly 10 times bigger than us, okay? Now, so on a absolute number, maybe Turkey has more papers, but on a per capita, if you divide the number of papers by the number of people, okay, we're #1 in the world. Same about patents, registered patents. When you look at startup companies, now I'm talking about absolute numbers, okay, we are, on per capita, we're clearly #1, but also in an absolute number, we are one of the top 5. Actually, if you look at NASDAQ, okay, the first country that has the largest number of startups in NASDAQ is naturally the United States. Second one is China. Third one is Israel. But, you know, China and the US are a little bigger than Israel. You know, I mean, so my message here is there is something there, okay? Also, number of Nobel Prize winners, okay, we have 7 in the past 15 years and so on, which is higher proportion. There is also a big discussion, which I'm not going to go into, that the number of Jewish Nobel Prize winners is about 20% of all winners, which is like 100 times the statistical, you know, what we deserve to have. So it's a different discussion. Okay, also if you look at inventions, I took this from, you see here, EY, this is from Ernst & Young. They had like in the presentation like something like 10 pages like that with examples. I just took one example, 1 page like that. But, and if we have time, either now or in the last session in an hour, I'm going to give many of those examples. I'm going to mention them again. But this conkey that we just used here to, I mean, I didn't need to bring my computer with me to here. I just brought this little, you know, storage device to bring my thing. Was invented in Israel, okay? We're going to talk a little about ICQ later, voicemail, how you call it, firewall, given imaging, I'm going to talk later, Waze, and many others. So there are a lot of inventions that everybody in the world is using, and not everybody is aware that they were invented in Israel. Okay, so in a sense, it has impact globally beyond just the commercial aspect. I heard that question, I think, before, or also about multinational companies or global companies. Everybody who is somebody in the world has a research and development center in Israel. There are about 350 such centers, okay? So it's Google and Yahoo and Microsoft and IBM and Apple and any American companies, plus Samsung, and many of the Chinese companies, and Japanese companies, and European companies. Everybody has some kind of an R&D center in Israel. It's almost became a myth that if you don't have a research center in Israel, you are in a competitive disadvantage. So you need to have this ingredient in your offering, whatever, in order to be competitive. And it doesn't need to be true. And probably it is not true. But the myth builds, the expectation or the motivation for every global company to either develop their own R&D center, or what many people do, they buy some startups and make them to become the R&D center for them in Israel. Okay, so as I said, there are over 300 such centers in Israel, and actually around between 40 and 50% of the high-tech business comes from multinational companies. I was personally lucky. I was one of the first 4 employees of Intel in Israel back in 1974. Today, Intel is employing about 10,000 employees, plus something like 30,000 contractors, okay? And it is exporting somewhere around $4 to $5 billion a year. Okay, so it's a very huge operation, and it's not an Israeli company, it's a global company. It's based in Santa Clara, California, but it has a large impact on our economy, okay? I borrowed this slide from a friend that I met in a conference in Brazil a few years ago, and it shows, the top 20 startup ecosystems. This means an ecosystem that is conducive to innovation or to entrepreneurship. And it shows Tel Aviv, which is basically Israel, as number 2 after Silicon Valley and before places like Los Angeles, New York, and Boston, and also London, Paris, and others. Okay, so this is a credible place to be in, okay? And actually a year later, a few years later, it shows us as number 5. It doesn't matter whether you're number 2 or number 5 or even number 12, okay? Being in the top 20 in this list means that there is something happening there that is world-class. You are in the league of environments that are supportive to startups, to new businesses to evolve. Okay. Okay, here, I don't know if I'll be able to, sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't. This is a video. If it doesn't work, oh, it doesn't. Oh, and how do you do the sound? I'm going to stop it. Sorry. Stop it here. No, it doesn't stop. Okay, but somebody knows how this volume works? Okay, so I'm going to skip this slide now, and we're going to get back to it when I get technical assistance. Okay, actually, I could go on. There are maybe 5 more slides that discuss the symptoms, okay? I'm going to skip all those, okay? Plenty of, maybe this I'll mention. When you look at R&D budget or R&D spending, okay? In Israel, it is 4.3% of our GDP, as opposed to the average of OECD countries, which is 2.3%. So we are, I don't know what it is in Turkey. I don't know if it shows even, I didn't check. Oh, it does show up. Here's Turkey. Turkey is 1%. Okay, I mean, this basically says you invest in the future of your economy. Okay, so, and it is an indication of what is going to happen 5 or 10 or 20 years from now. I need the volume. So let me go back. Okay, where do you? Now, this video clip was created for the 70th anniversary of the State of Israel. Does it work? Okay, you're going to do something there. Okay. So it is somewhat commercial, but all the facts in it are true. So this is going to summarize my message about the impact that the high tech had. It's not only high tech, but mainly high tech had on our country and its performance. I don't know if to start or not. Is he doing something yet? Oh, here he is. Can I try it? Okay, yeah, you can hear now? Okay, good.
Israel is the 100th smallest country on the globe and has about 1/1000th of the world's population. It's only 70 years old, smaller than New Jersey, surrounded by enemies, under constant threat of survival, and possesses few natural resources. And yet, Israel is the only country in history to have revived an unspoken language. Since its founding, Israel has won the second highest number of Nobel Prizes per capita. Although the Jewish people are only 0.2% of the world population, Jews have received 22% of Nobel Prizes, constituting an inexplicable 11,250% above the statistical probability. Israel is the only country that entered the 21st century with a net gain in its number of trees. Even more remarkable, in an area that's mainly desert. Over 90% of Israeli homes use solar energy for hot water, the highest percentage of any country. Israeli companies are building the largest solar energy production facility in the world. Israel operates the world's largest desalination plant and is the #1 country providing usable water from seawater. Israel's scientific research institutions are ranked 3rd in the world and are ranked 2 in space sciences. Israel leads the world in medical patents and has revolutionized modern medicine. Oramed is changing the diabetes therapeutic paradigm by delivering insulin in a pill. Rewalk's exoskeleton allows paraplegics to walk. Orcam allows blind people to virtually see. Israel has more patents registered in the US than Russia, India, and China combined, who have 300 times Israel's population. Israel's innovations have improved the way we work, print, drive, read, eat, drink, talk, exercise, and even play. Israel is the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, and its 3rd largest party is often the Arab Party. Israel has provided humanitarian aid and rescue services to over 140 countries, even to some that refuse to recognize it, like Syria and Lebanon. Israel is the 3rd most educated country in the world, according to the OECD. Israel has the world's 2nd highest number of new books per capita. Israel has the 3rd highest rate of entrepreneurship among women in the world. And in 1969, Israel elected Golda Meir, the 2nd female head of state in modern history. In proportion to its population, Israel has the largest number of high-tech startup companies in the world. In absolute numbers, Israel has more startups than any other country except the US and China. Israel is the only country whose indigenous population returned to its native land after 2,000 years of forced exile. There are 26 official Muslim states in the world and 18 official Christian states, but there is only one Jewish state. Israel, a small place making a big difference.
As I said, it's a commercial, but still, you know, it gives you in 2 minutes or 3 minutes many of the facts that I was trying to convey. I think one more slide, and then I'm going to go to how it happened. And that is that I was under the impression sometime that this phenomenon of new startups and so on is decaying. It turns out this graph, what it shows is the number of exits every year and the amount of money raised in those exits. So everybody knows what an exit is? Exit means one of two things. Either that you go public, namely your stock is starting to get traded in one of the exchanges, usually NASDAQ or New York Exchange or whatever, or that you were bought by another company. In both cases, it means that somebody is willing to put a value on the company. You know, the share value times the number of shares outside gives you the value of the company. So it turns out that over the years, roughly on the average 90 exits every year. And the amount of money raised varies because of some big deals, but on the average, somewhere around $5 billion. Okay, it turns out, by the way, this is until 2014. In 15, 16, and 17, the numbers were even higher. Okay, which means that it's not decaying, it's even increasing. Which means that we're still seeing this phenomenon of new exits. Actually, last year, or in the last couple of years, there were, I think, 5 or 6 huge acquisitions. Starting with Mobileye with 15 billion, there was Frutarom with 6-point-something billion, there was Orbotech lately with 3.3 billion. I mean, there were multi-billion deals, somewhere around 5 or 6 of them in the past couple of years. So the message here is the phenomenon still continue. Now, the next few minutes I'm going to explain what really happened here or why it happened. And then we should ask ourselves, is this relevant to Turkey or not relevant to Turkey? And the answer is not yes or no, it's convoluted. Okay, so in my mind, it is a combination of 2 things. One is the Israeli character, culture, whatever you call it, or Israeli context. The second one has to do with specific timing and events that happened in a certain sequence. So let me start with the first one. I have 4 grandchildren, okay? The youngest one is now 4-year-old. When he was 2 years old, he already, was managing the family. Basically, he was manipulating his parents, his grandparents. First of all, he thought he knows everything, I mean, you're not going to tell him whether something is dangerous or something is, precious or whatever. He needs to find out for himself, and he's going to believe only himself because he thinks he knows better than anybody. And furthermore, if he needs something or wants something, he's going to get it. If father says no, he goes to mother. If not, he goes to the grandparents. Eventually, he's going to get what he thinks he needs, regardless of whether he needs it or not. It doesn't matter, okay? And why am I saying that? Because this is not just him, it's typical to children from very, very early age. And it's actually a huge challenge for the educational system. If you go to a kindergarten or to elementary school and so on, you see that the teachers or the kindergarten, whatever you call them, people there, have a huge challenge to control their children there. Because, just think of a class of 30 children, each one of them knows what's better for him, okay, and does whatever he wants and not what the teacher tells him to do, and so on. The noise is deafening, and you lose control of the class. Actually, it is a nightmare, okay? But it is conveying the message that, Israelis are very opinionated. They have a very high degree of self-confidence that in many cases are unwarranted, but still, it's a phenomenon that is how it shows up. And here comes the next characteristic, which is even making things, I don't know if you say worse, but more exaggerated. They are unafraid of failure, okay? I mean, in Israel, failure is not considered something bad, okay? You try something and you fail, you go move on to the next thing, and if it fails again, it failed again, doesn't matter. I'm saying that because there are cultures where once you failed in something, you're doomed, okay? It's like they put a stamp on your forehead, he is a failure, he's not going to try anything anymore, okay? So people are so afraid of failure that they don't try things, okay? They're paralyzed by this concern of failure. In Israel, it's the other way around. If you have a crazy idea, you're going to try it, okay? I know better than the world what's good for them. Or I have this crazy idea, I'm going to try it. If it works, fine. If it doesn't work, so big deal, I tried, okay? And this is, in a sense, driving this whole phenomenon. Because if I go back now to our discussion about the economy and so on, if you ask yourself, first of all, why Israel has more successes, why is Israel having this huge, number of high-tech companies and so on and so forth? Many people think, hey, the Israelis are smart. They're not, okay? The Israeli IQ is no different than Turkey or than France or than India or any other country, okay? You know the bell shape, okay? We have some very smart people and we have very dumb people. Like anybody else, in the middle of the bell shape is roughly where everybody has the same IQ. It's not, the Israelis have no better IQ than anybody, okay? What is different is the entrepreneurship orientation, okay? On the average in Israel, there are about 5x per capita more startups starting than any other place in the world, okay? Namely, we should have, let's say, somewhere around, I don't know, 400 or 300 startups starting every year. We have 2,000 starting every year. Most of them are going to be failures. It doesn't matter, okay? What happens is, and here there's a rule of thumb that says, I mentioned it I think in the morning, okay? The rule of thumb says that 1 in 20 companies is going to be successful, okay? Or 5 out of 100. 4 to 5%, that's, and it works, these big numbers work everywhere on everything, okay? Now, if I knew which company is going to be successful, I'm going to invest in it and I'm going to be a millionaire, I wouldn't be here, okay? I'm not. But eventually, okay, the big statistics works. So if I had 100 new startups every year, then I would have 5 successful companies 3 or 5 years later. But if I have 2,000, then I'm going to have 100 every year. And this is what happens in Israel. This is the phenomenon is not because there are more smarter people or better ideas or whatever it is because more people are unafraid to try things, and eventually more startups start, and as a result, more startups succeed, okay? Not beating the statistics. The statistics are still 1 in 20, okay? But it's out of a bigger number because of more people trying things, okay? And when you think about it, okay, actually, this phenomenon is feeding itself, because if I tried something and I failed, okay, like an Israeli, I'll try another thing and another thing and another thing. Hopefully sometime I'm going to be successful. Sometimes some people are never successful, okay? So it's not like they're beating the statistics, but they're trying, again, because they already went through this process with its ups and downs and so on, and they are motivated, they are energized, they are trying again and again and again, okay? If you are successful, definitely you're going to try again. Okay, and then also it's easier for you to get funding because you have success under your belt and so on. So basically, this is feeding this whole, phenomenon. Okay, there are other reasons that have to do with military service that gives you teamwork and gives you managerial education and all sorts of other things, but they are secondary to this basic, I'd say, cultural and characteristic aspect that has to do with the guts to try things and to take risks and so on. This is the element of it. Now let's go to the other aspect, which is the history of the thing, okay? I take you back almost 30 years to 1990, okay? The biggest thing in the world at the time, most of you were, I don't know, you were born or were very young then, was the collapse of the Eastern Bloc. You remember Berlin Wall or the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it had many impacts on many things. One side effect of that was that we had, within 5 years, a wave of immigration of about 1 million people, Jews that emigrated from ex-USSR into Israel. Okay, because until then they weren't allowed to leave and so on. Then suddenly they could leave. So out of 3.5 or 4 million Jews there, about 1 million left Russia or left the other USSR states and came to Israel. Okay, now you take a country of 5 million at the time or 4 million at the time and you get an influx of like 20% of the population. They had no clue what to do with them, okay? And initially, they got all sorts of low-paying jobs, as cleaning ladies or as guardians in shopping centers and in parking lots and all sorts of other positions. Actually, the lady that is cleaning our home used to be a music teacher, and she couldn't find a job because if you don't have the language, you cannot teach children, whatever. And she found a job as a cleaning lady and did it, still does it. Okay? Now, at a certain point in time, somebody, somewhere in the government came with an idea of something that today looks self-evident because it's all over the place. But the first place in the world that it started was in Israel, and that's called the incubators. So the idea was to take a floor of offices in almost every city or town, put like 10 offices in it, let people who came from there that had education, because the one thing we can tell about this emigrating population was they had very good education, scientific education, engineering education, and so on. You give them an office, 2 or 3 people, you give them the equipment they need, computers or lab equipment or whatever it is, you give them salary for a year or 2, and tell them, do the thing that you thought about or gave me an idea, whatever you want. Okay? That was the motivation was to keep them busy doing something, and maybe something will come out of it. Now, so over those 5 years or so, about 500 companies like that were created. To the best of my knowledge, all of them except one were failures. Okay? There was one exception, which was a company that still exists, still successful, called Medinol. They invented the stent, the stent that you put in the arteries to avoid clogging. So that was invented by one of those companies. But it is the exception. All other 499 were failures. So it's not like it was a big commercial success. But 2 things came out of it. One is the infrastructure of those incubators was in place. The second thing is, somebody mentioned to me at lunch, there was Keren Yozma. It was a fund that was created by the government that gave those companies or those teams something like $30,000, $50,000 for initial, like a patent registration, for some proof of concept, things of that kind. So those 2 things were in place if you go to 1995, 1996, and so on. And then something else happened that for the young people here, you wouldn't understand what I'm talking about. The older ones will understand. And that's the internet. Okay? For you, you were born into internet. It's there. Okay? I still remember the day, it was in, I think, 1995, maybe 1996, where my friend showed me this internet thing that you press a key and you, over a fraction of a second, you get to the Library of Congress in the US or the Louvre in Paris or God knows what, think about whatever you want, and you can browse through it and you can get all the information you want. It was mind-blowing. I mean, in my mind, it sounded unreal. And when this happened, it caught like fire everywhere. This WWW, World Wide Web thing. But initially, there were no applications to use it. There were no WhatsApp and no Facebook and nothing. Okay, so the world was thirsty and hungry or whatever to applications that would use this capability. And then a team of 4 students, okay, your age, younger than you actually, from the University of Tel Aviv, sat for 2 months and developed an application and started spreading it around for free. And over 6 months or so, they garnered over 20 million users. And then, I don't know if you heard of AOL, okay, it was a huge conglomerate in the US, bought their startup for $400 million, okay? Somebody knows what this application was? ICQ, chat, yeah, okay? Pardon? ICQ, okay? So that was it. Now, today we have an exit like that every month. Nobody cares. It doesn't appear on papers at all, or it appears in the economical section in page 17 somewhere as a small print. It's no big deal. At the time, it was on the front page of every newspaper for about a week. I mean, it was, how come those students worked for 2 months, okay, and got this $400 million bonanza, okay? Unthinkable. And this caused a huge shockwave in all of Israel, because Israelis say, hey, those students are not smarter than me. If they can do it, I can do it also. And overnight, it's called mushrooming. Like mushrooms that grow after the rain start showing up everywhere. So hundreds of ICQs startups starting everywhere, okay? Because everyone thought they could be the next ICQ, okay? Now, money was not a problem because, as I said, the whole VC world and so on was hungry to get those applications for the internet or all sorts of other kind of smart, inventions and so on. So within that started this snowball rolling. And basically, ever since, every year there were hundreds of such companies created. Some of them got funding, and some of them were successful. Most of them were failures, but still, you go on and on and on. And ever since, now we're talking about almost 30 years? No, 20 years, roughly. Okay, from 1997, I think, till today, that this phenomenon was ongoing. So, by the way, this is a more deeper discussion, but you can say it's timing. The fact that there was incubators and that there were the funding for early stage and there was the internet and so on and so forth. Or you can say that it's something that some bigger force than us has created. This is up to you, anybody, whatever they believe in. But the end result was that we are still observing this phenomenon ongoing. Okay, so this explains basically what happened. Okay. We're running out of time, so I have another section that shows these examples of companies, okay? I think what we may want to do is in the next lecture take about 15-20 minutes to show those examples, and then I go deeper into one specific example that I personally was involved in, okay? So now actually to ask yourself, okay, how do you project that on Turkey, okay? I mean, I must admit, I'm not in a position to give you advice because you know better your environment than me. I can tell you some things you should bear in mind if you would like to drive change or to drive improvement. Okay? The first one is that in your education system, emphasize more also the business side and not just the technology side. Okay, we discussed it in the morning. Okay, namely that those who are capable will be motivated to take that invention and make it a commercial success, regardless of whether they're going to benefit personally or the university is going to benefit or the country is going to benefit. Okay, but translate some of the excellence that you have in your academic bodies or in anywhere else into commercial success. This is one. The second one is to have in place some infrastructure that is like a safety net, like in the circus, that people are doing things up there, but if they fall, they don't fall in the ground, but fall into some net that is giving you, the suspense. So have some safety net for failures so that they are not as painful, so that more people will be motivated to try and encourage people to try, okay? Again, I'm not sure how the cultural thing works here. I'm not trying to attempt to change your culture, but and maybe it's already compatible with that. But wherever you can encourage people to try things, okay, it's going to work great. By the way, we do it with children. I mean, our children, when they're very young, we encourage them to try things, and not to, because they learn as they try, though they fail. To try to walk, to try to run, to try to write, whatever they do. And initially, the results are not that great, but as they improve, as they try, they become better at it. Same applies to everything we're doing. Okay, so, and again, there's no monopoly on wisdom, okay? But the more people try, the more successes you're going to enjoy. And it's very difficult to know upfront which one is going to succeed and which one is not. In certain cases, you see up front that it's not a non-starter, or that this one looks very promising, but it's rare. In most cases, you don't know up front, but you need to try also to gain experience, but also to increase the odds that some of those trials are going to be successful. So there is no recipe for success here, but there is this mindset that says, hey, as a country, if we want to get from $10,000 per person per year to $20,000 per person per year, okay, probably the only way or probably the most sure way to try it is through entrepreneurship, through many more startups, many more companies trying new things, okay, and maybe one more thing that I didn't mention, have in your mind global market, not local market, okay? Which, by the way, for Israel, it's working very naturally, okay? We have only a population of 8 million people, Any startup doesn't think about the Israel market. They use sometimes Israeli users for experiments or for alpha sites, okay? But you clearly, from day one, you ask yourself, how am I going to penetrate the American market or the European market or the Asian market, okay? Because the Israel market is nothing, okay? So also you should ask yourself, okay, how am I going to go globally? How am I going to conquer the world with my invention or with the solution that I've developed? So these are like, you know, off the shooting from the hip, some things to think about that could make, you know, your environment or your economy more effective. But again, I'm not in a position to make real, you know, advice. Questions? Good. So, yes.
Rough number of startups happening was it 2,000?
Yes, 2,000 per year. Between 1,500 and 2,000. Okay. And as I said, you know, 95% of them are going to be failures. Doesn't matter. Another question? Okay. Yes.
Do you have any idea about like external funding, like investors from outside of Israel? Because I would assume that in a developing economy, or Israel, would have some support, like economical support, maybe from like inbound companies. Do you have any idea, like maybe it's like a couple of $1 billion or more?
It's more, I think. Well, first of all, what happens in Israel is that, I mentioned it in the morning, okay? There is the initial investment, which is like up to $100,000 or $200,000. Usually this is from local sources. Sometimes it's the Ministry of Economy, sometimes it is the chief scientist, sometimes it is some other funds and so on that are usually local, okay? From 3 million further, it is usually VCs and so on, which are usually international. It could be companies, you know, like IBM or Intel or, I don't know, Mitsubishi. But in many cases, it is just venture capitalists and so on. So they have a very large percent of that one. And in the Death Valley, in between 500,000 and 3 million, it is usually some angels or some other places that you get this necessary funding, and that is mixed between local and global. I would say, if you look at the whole economy, I'd say about more than 50% of the funding comes from external funds, okay? Not necessarily companies, but yes.
How much of the overall economy in Israel is coming from the startups before they exit versus multinational companies?
Less than 5%.
Less than 5%.
Yeah, that's why I don't call it startup nation, but rather high-tech nation.
But the multinational companies would make up
40 to 50%.
40 to 50%. So the remaining is the local corporate companies.
Companies who used to be startups, but they are now 20 years old. I don't call them a startup anymore. Like Tech Checkpoint, okay? It's a company of $20 billion sales, something like that, okay? And they were a startup 30 years ago, but now they are a large corporation. And they are more like that, okay? So they are companies that are large, and they have huge impact, and they're successful, and so on.
And within the last 20 years, how about the growth of multinational companies and this local corporate companies to understand this growth?
In absolute numbers, it was a huge growth. As far as the percent of the economy, I guess it was, I didn't check it, but I guess it was also something like 40% of the high-tech at the time. But then it was a very, very small high-tech company, high-tech industry. Today it's a huge high-tech industry. So they grew tremendously in scope, in numbers, number of employees and everything. But as far as their percent of the overall high-tech sector, it's probably kept the same.
I mean, I would expect you would have seen the same level of growth in multinational companies
Yes.
compared to the growth in GDP.
Yeah, you did. You see that. Yes. Yes.
Government funding.
Mhm.
We also get government funding, which is more effective or not, and it has more clues on it was a startup.
I'm not sure I understood the question, but at the early stage, we have a body called the Chief Scientist, and it is actually changed its name now. It's called the Innovation Authority, but it's the same body. And they have 34 different programs from different for different stages, for different situations, and so on. And they include all sorts of programs that are oriented at very young startups in their initial stages to fund them and to help them and so on. Most of those don't have strings attached. Namely, if you fail, you don't need to return a penny. If you are successful, then you need to return what you got, okay, which is a fair deal, okay? Yes, it is funded by the Ministry of Economy, and the Chief Scientist is under that ministry, okay? It is very substantial in the very early stage. Okay, but then the sums are you get $50,000. Okay, it's very different than you get $5 million. Okay, so it's not comparison. On absolute numbers, the private funding is much bigger. But they go into many, many more teams and at the critical stage when they just start. So it is very important. Okay, so thank you. Let's get together in 10 minutes. Good.